Hello and welcome to the Car Care Reviews channel, and welcome to the 2025 Nissan Altima. And in today's video, we're going to do a proper technical review under the hood. We're going to take a look underneath it, inside and out, some things we like, some things we do not like, right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood. So here's something that changed on the Altima in 2025. They used to have two engine options. You used to have the 2-liter 4-cylinder variable compression engine, which is great on paper, disaster apparently on the real world. That's why they decided to call it quits on that engine. So we only have one engine option in 2025, which is the PR25DD. 2.5-liter direct injected, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine. Let's dive into its mechanical construction and we'll go from there. At the very top, you have a plastic valve cover. This is pretty standard in the automotive industry. This one seems to be decent quality. I don't see it to be very cheap and flimsy. Now, underneath that is a single piece cylinder head with dual overhead cam, 16 valve, all the good stuff. But this has buckets. Doesn't have hydraulic lifters or anything, so this does have manual valve clearance. Pretty interesting to see in 2025 because this engine actually traces its roots to 2019. Still 2019, hydraulic lifters were the thing, but not for this one. Moving on. This is a dual variable valve timing engine. The intake is electronic, so it has a motor in the front, spins the inner part of the gear. If the motor speeds up faster than the camshaft, the timing is advanced. If it spins slower than the camshaft, the timing is retarded. If it spins the same as the camshaft, it is base timing. Pretty simple design. Many manufacturers have used this. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen. It's actually not the case. This is actually very simple because the exhaust is oil controlled. And for some reason, in this Nissan, it has two valves. Two oil control valves, not one. Two is better than one, I guess. It is completely oil controlled. You know, oil pressure, advance or retard the timing as needed. And that's very simple. That's how most engines used to do it up to the electronic point. Now, the block is all aluminum. This engine does have two timing chains, one of them from the cams to the crank with an internal hydraulic tensioner, nothing special there. The second timing chain also has a hydraulic internal tensioner, which is usually not the case. That one goes to the engine balancer. Speaking of the balancer, at the bottom of the engine, you have two oil pans, upper and lower. In the upper, the balancer sits. But here's an interesting thing. The oil pump is actually part of that balancer. It's a variable displacement oil pump. It is part of that. So technically that second chain drives the balancer and the oil pump at the same time. Now this engine is direct injected only. The high pressure fuel pump sits right at the top. What I like about it is it sits on the side. So it's not on top of the valve cover directly, which is a pretty cool design. They have a little kind of cap at the end, and that's where the high pressure fuel pump sits. Injectors are right underneath the intake manifold. Good place for them, not right on top of the valve cover, which is pretty cool. This engine does have a cooled EGR in the not the best spot in the world, although somewhat accessible, but still. It sits all the way in the back. It does have a cooler, valve, and then the pipes go to the intake in the front, because remember, this is an older designed engine and they're still trying to pass emissions, so EGR was necessary. Now the cooling system on this engine is pretty basic, super basic actually. Belt driven, water pump mechanical, thermostat, no fancy valves or anything, but this engine does have an oil cooler, which is pretty cool, so coolant does go to that oil cooler as well. Let's talk about the transmission here, because we only have one transmission option. It is a CVT. And yeah, CVTs with Nissan, Jatco, don't have the best reputation in the planet. There's good news, there's bad news about this one. Good news are, this is probably one of the most sophisticated CVTs, drive feel-wise. I mean, you get in most CVT cars, they'll just drone and drone and drone, they're super annoying. This one is actually very smooth, and the way it controls the ratios, it almost doesn't feel like a CVT because they've been at CVT game for a very long time. That's why they were able to refine it. Bad news are they have a reputation for not lasting long. It's one of their things. It is, though, a standard torque converter in between the engine and transmission. It is a steel belt construction on this CVT. Having said that, I want to talk to you about some observations here under the hood because there are some pretty interesting stuff. So most front-wheel drive configured cars, they'll have one or two ways to mount the engine. They're either going to have the mounts directly on the subframe. They'll just have a stabilizer torque rod that stabilizes the movement of the engine to the body, or they'll mount the powertrain on the chassis and just stabilize the movement at the bottom to the subframe. This one has it in a very interesting configuration. So the powertrain is mounted to the body of the car, but they do have the torque rod not underneath it, it's on top, usually where you'd find the other style. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they did that. The other thing is, Nissan has always done this. The side of the engine where your belt is, all the accessories and everything, is very busy, very close. You do have a big timing cover over there. They've always done it that way. It makes service on that side a little bit more difficult than usual. Unnecessarily so, if you ask me. Now, this engine does have the intake manifold in the front, exhaust manifold in the back. Not my preferred or any mechanic's preferred style. We'd like to see the exhaust in the front, intake in the back. Not a big issue, but overall, the quality of things here is, for lack of a better word, hit and miss. Hit because you don't have a lot of plastic in the coolant stuff. I mean, I see some distinct metal pipes that run on top of the engine. There's not a heavy use of plastic. But here's the interesting part. They have the beautiful spring clamps everywhere that are proper, and hose and clamp, and everything is proper. And then occasionally you find a very chintzy looking worm clamp. Granted, it's not an important stuff, but just feels strange. And then somehow, some way, I mean, this is a tiny little 4-cylinder. Service at the top, very simple. Side, very complicated. They managed to make this engine bay very busy. And this is an old school engine. There isn't this a small cylinder head. Everything is small. It's very narrow, but it's very busy. There's not much space in the front, not much space in the back, not much space in the sides. It's like, why is it this way? You know, this is one complaint about modern cars is everything got so complicated, you can't even see anything. This is not exactly the latest and the greatest. Doesn't even have a hybrid system, doesn't have anything. Things are busy. That's one thing about them. But for the most part, things seem well made, at least looking around it, which is good. Let's take a look underneath the 2025 Nissan Altima. I really like these covers. Yes, they are plastic, but they're nice quality plastic, not the fabric feeling thing. I like it. The only thing I dislike is you have to remove this entire thing to do an oil change. I mean, a little access door would have been nice. Just humble 2 cents. With that, I like that they left you all these openings so you can clearly see where the subframe is should you need to lift it in the front. That is pretty cool. Let's take a look at the front suspension, front brakes. Single piston caliper, something to be expected of a car of this size. And lower control arm that is aluminum, does have a ball joint built into it. Aluminum knuckle. You do have a McPherson strut in the top. However, it is not bolted onto the knuckle. It has this clamp deal, which is not the best thing for service. If we come around and look here, we do have an aluminum sway bar link, which is not the coolest thing on the planet, but I do like one thing. They put this nut here. So when you go to take the other side nut, you can hold it from there. That is actually a pretty cool design. Not all manufacturers do that. Going away from that, the exhaust, you do have a catalytic converter right here, pretty exposed. I wish it was a little bit more hidden. You notice there is absolutely no covering or insulation at all on the floor. And this is where things slightly fall off. And by slightly, I mean fall off completely. So look at this seam. So here's the thing with manufacturing. You put this is seam sealer. So you have a seam. These are two separate panels. You can clearly see here. They put that so water and debris won't get inside and start corroding at the weld, at the spot welds. Well, this one is okay-ish. You do have a big opening here and a big opening all over. Maybe a little bit more would have been nice, but that's fine. Then this was the Friday robot that sprayed that one. I mean, this line was supposed to be on here, completely missed the mark. You notice this one is also sprayed here and the other side as well. Friday robot. No, Didn't get that one. And here's what I don't understand. I mean, we sprayed this, and that is very nice. I would love to see this all over, but we have all these open spots. And here, it almost looks like there was something here that was preventing us from spraying this. When I start seeing stuff like that, that's when I start to... Moving on. This was a Friday car. Let's look here. Go all the way around. This is where your transfer case is. It's always spinning the rear drive shaft because this is an all-wheel drive car. Then we get to the back, and I feel like this car was not exactly designed to be all-wheel drive. They kind of last minute decided, let's do it. Might not be the case, don't quote me on that, but it just feels that way. Just look at this exhaust section right here. I don't know. I mean, this must have taken a lot of effort to get it to this shape. Nice welds and everything looks great. I mean, this particular section looks really nice, but I don't know why we just not raise this and make it a perfectly fine pipe. You know, save a few bucks, because this is actually a very cool pipe. But here's where things get even stranger. The sway bar. Tell me this is not the strangest shaped sway bar you've ever seen. So it comes up here to clear the exhaust, then it comes completely down, and then it kind of just comes up slowly to meet the place. Very unsymmetrical. It would bother me a lot, but this is how they deemed it. Speaking of all-wheel drive, cute little differential. Of course, this is not meant for anything off-road and anything. This is more for drivability, and this works perfectly fine. Very cute little axles. And this is one of the smallest axles I've seen actually in a car. So here's how all-wheel drive happens in this car. Transfer case in the front is always spinning the prop shaft. You get to this section, you notice there's two components here. This is a differential, standard differential. This has a clutch inside of it. The computer controls this electronically, this clutch, to engage or disengage all-wheel drive, and how much. The more it engages and less slip it allows, the more power goes to the rear wheels. And the more slip it allows, the less power goes to the front rear wheels. That's how this works. Pretty simple, pretty rugged. I mean, there isn't much to it. It's just all the magic happens here and just the differential. Let's look at the rear suspension here. So all the arms except the upper control arm are steel. The upper control arm is aluminum. You do have an aluminum knuckle. You do have a single piston caliper with an integrated parking brake. You do have a separate shock from the spring. That's a pretty standard setup here. Then we arrive in the next part. I feel like this part is not a good idea. I've never seen a 90-degree turn on an exhaust like this. This is, again, that afterthought part. So usually this will curve here and kind of split, nice even split, but because of the differential here, they had to do this. This literally looks like a water pipe at your house, you know, a copper pipe. It's just 90 degree. Very interesting to see that. It's kind of a strange deal. Then it comes out to the dual mufflers. This side is somewhat covered. You do have this giant opening, but you do have this cover. This side, much more open. This is what I wish manufacturers would close up. It really helps not have debris all the way up to the top. But you do have this little, I don't want to call it a diffuser, but I guess that was the intent with that. Let's take a look at the outside of the 25 Nissan Altima. This is a sharp looking car. This is one thing the Altima has always been. Sharp looking car. I really like it. It doesn't follow the trends. Nissan has always done their own designs and their own world with the Altima. Starting in the front, I really like their new logo. This looks cool. Like, they do write their trim right here, SR, which is a sport model. I have to emphasize that in red. The design, they do have a lot going on in the hood, a little bit, but they didn't get too carried away. I like interesting, this side of the hood kind of curves down and overlaps the fender. Although the gap here is very large. It almost looks like something is off, especially when you look at it from the side. It almost looks like the hood is open, but not the end of the world. I really like these wheels, and the color kind of complements this color. This is an optional wheel. I think it looks pretty cool. Then we go to the side of it. You notice the mud flaps are body color. It's interesting. It's a cue that this comes from a different era. Pretty decent sized mirrors, pretty decent sized windows. The visibility is actually decent out of this car. It does almost feel like the size of the Maxima. You know, the Maxima is no longer here, but this is almost taken that size up. Now, the intelligent key, that's what Nissan calls it. You don't have a touch sensor. It's actually a button to lock and unlock. You just have the key in your pocket. That is a little bit of an older design, but it works. It's not a concern, of course, in this segment. We're not expecting it to be in the back. Coming around the back here, this particular section right here, it almost reminds me of a Lexus GS 350. Small cues, and that came out first before this redesign. Just the taillight section. Come out at the back, same thing. Does look pretty good. It's not gonna stop any shows, but it doesn't have a spaceship look like some of the newer models from other competitors. You cannot mistake this for anything but a Nissan. I think it looks pretty good. Badging, I like their new logo here as well. It says Altima trim, and this specifically says all-wheel drive. It's not excessive. I think it's actually on the old school side of things. This particular one being sport does have this spoiler, of course. Now the trunk is massive, in my opinion. That's a pretty large trunk. It's a kind of a surprise to see it this big. Underneath this mat, you do have a spare tire, which is nice. Absolutely no insulation whatsoever anywhere. Just to be expected this segment. And overall, I think this is a looker. This is one of the good things about this car. It does look pretty good. Let's take a look at the interior of a 2025 Nissan Altima. Now, there are two ways to every street. There's good, there's bad here. It depends on which side of the street you sit on. Let's start with the good. I love that this interior is basic and focused. No drama, no fuss. And that you immediately see as soon as you get into it. But it's not bland and just completely horrendous to look at. For example, look at the gauges. There's two big gauges and a screen in the middle. I love that. Does everything a big giant screen does that you need. Nothing more, nothing less. Just keep it simple. Steering wheel controls, super simple, although I have to say one thing. Blank switches on the steering wheel is very interesting to see in 2025. We'll talk about those in a second. You look at the shifter. It is a proper physical shifter. No gimmicky rotary dial or buttons or whatever. Just a proper shifter. HVAC controls. They are manual for this 2025 Nissan Altima, not even auto. Extremely simple to operate. Infotainment system is very 2019. Now, this is the lower grade. There is a higher trim with a 12.3-inch screen. That one is a little bit better, but this one is, yeah, it could use some more. Doesn't have wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, and it doesn't have much going on. It's just a screen there. It works, does a few things, and that's about it. Now, here's the interesting thing about this car. The materials are nice. They're not the nicest thing in the planet, but they are decent for a car of this segment, although not the price of this car, which we'll talk about in a second. The seats are pretty comfortable, but they are missing one vital thing: lumbar support. This doesn't have lumbar support. It's part of a package, which is kind of a strange decision. I mean, if it's a power seat here, please have the lumbar support. No, it's part of an option, and kind of a strange decision. And that's what takes us to the bad stuff. So we talked about the blank switches on the steering. That's because this does not have adaptive cruise control. Yet it has accident avoidance in the front, in the back, automatic braking in the front and the back. So it has all the sensors and the systems in there. They just turned it off by software, the adaptive cruise control. Make it part of an option package. Don't understand what's that about, but that's the case. Then we talk about the ride. This is where we have some real problems. The seats, when you're stopped, they are comfortable, they're fine. The interior is a nice place to be, but when you start driving, especially this SR trim, which is a sport model, it has a way about crashing into bumps, and the noise it makes, it almost feels like something is off. It is very unrefined. I mean, the suspension is really not refined here. It is not exactly the best handling car on the planet. It's decent, but don't expect miracles here. And it is very loud on bumps, extremely loud, not smooth, really not refined, and that the truth have to be said about that. And on the other side of things, the road noise is extremely loud. I mean, this is something we took it on a highway drive. It is a lot louder than cars in this segment, and that, as we looked underneath it, kind of understandable because there's absolutely no insulation anywhere. You kind of expect that in a segment like this, but at this price of this car, could be a little bit better because competitors in this price range, they are a little bit better than this. And when you sit in this car, you are immediately reminded that you bought the cheap one. Blank switches here, blank switch here, blank switches here. The windows are auto down and up only on the driver's window, not even the passenger, definitely not the rears. Sunroof is an option, which I understand. Sunroofs, I'm actually glad they're an option, but initially when you sit in, it's a comfortable car, it's like, oh, this is nice, this is not bad. But then you spend some time, it's like, there is a lot missing here. Where's my wireless charger? No lumbar support, no wireless auto CarPlay and Android Auto, and then that's when things kind of go downhill to the next section. Let's take a look at the back seat of the Nissan Altima. I'm 5'7". This is my driving position. I have a lot of knee room, very good headroom. This, of course, doesn't have a sunroof. Pretty comfortable back seat, pretty roomy. There isn't much to talk about here. There's a USB-C and USB-A. There is no vents, although it feels like there is a perfect spot for one. But in this particular one, we don't have it. The build quality overall, when you look at the whole picture, the headliner could be better. I mean, there's some very big gaps and things don't line up very well. But overall, I really like the material on the seats and the shape of the design of the seats and whatnot. It's a nice place to be. So back seat gives it a thumbs up, which the rest of the car did. Which is going to lead us into the next section. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the 2025 Nissan Altima. And I'll keep this one simple. The entire thing, when you take everything in perspective, and let me share that perspective. This car, as tested, is $34,580 with destination. Here's what you get for that. 2019 powertrain, which doesn't have the most stellar reliability reputation. No lumbar support. No adaptive cruise control, no wireless charger, no auto climate control, no wireless Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, a very unrefined suspension, super loud noise, not the most powerful engine, and not the best gas mileage. Yet it's still priced similar to competitors that do all the above and do it a lot better. That's the problem with this car. Look, I will be honest. I love me a car with no gimmicks, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people that want cars with no gimmicks, and because that's what drives the prices of cars up. And this fits that box perfectly. But here's the problem. You're paying the same for less. Some people will like these gimmicks, but some people won't. And the reason they don't like them is because they break down and they cost a lot more to buy. Well, you're getting none of them, but you're still paying the same. That's the biggest problem with this, and I fear this is what's going to affect the sales of the Altima going forward if something doesn't change. Because if this was priced below $30,000 as optioned right here with all delivery and destination and whatnot, then this will give the fancy, gimmicky competitors a run for their gimmicks, because then it would be priced properly and doesn't have gimmicks. But that's not the case. I am at a crossroads with this one. It's a tough one. And here's why. I love Nissan and I love the Altima. I've actually driven every single generation Altima from back in the day till today, and there was a time where this was a serious competitor in this segment. But here's the bottom line in this car. This is a great $27,000 car. And yes, they start around that, but this particular trim as optioned right here, it's a great $27,000 car. I mean, it is a breath of fresh air. The car manufacturer still can make gimmickless cars, basic A to B cars, look good, drive decent, no drama, no fuss. But here's the problem. I cross-compared this to its chief competitors, which is from Japan. The 2025 Toyota Camry SE Hybrid, which is their only hybrid, and then the 2025 Honda Accord Sport Hybrid. Now, these are both hybrids that I'm comparing it to, so you expect them to be a lot more expensive, and they have all the options and the gimmicks and the stuff that this doesn't have. But here's the problem. They cost almost the same, with the Accord being a little bit more expensive, but the Camry was exactly the same. That's when things start to sharply fall for the Altima. I mean, some of these gimmicks are actually useful and good, but if somebody doesn't want any gimmicks, this is the model they should be looking at because it doesn't have none of the gimmicks. But at this price, we have a serious problem, even in the build quality department. I will sum it up with this. This, as it sits, is a 2019 model year car with 2025 model year car prices. It should be the other way around. It should be a 2025 car with 2019 prices, because then this starts to really make sense and starts to make the Camry and the Accord look like gimmicky spaceships that are overpriced, but not when they're at the same price. That is the problem with this car, and that's, unfortunately, is what's going to severely affect the sales of this car because they're just too expensive, and they cannot justify that too expensive for anything that this has. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.